How to plaster a wall using thistle fast set finish. Right, so the first thing I do, you got to make sure you protect all the floors, walls, any furniture in the room, curtains. I'll use polythene over furniture and carpet protector and hardwood protector over the floors. Plastering is quite messy, so the more protection you can fit beforehand, the tidier you'll be at the end and the easier the cleanup will be. Then I personally like to fix masking tape or duct tape all around the edges of the wall that I'm working on, especially in a finished home. It's a bit different if you're in a building site or if you're doing a full refurb, but when you're just doing one wall in a beautiful finished lounge, I find it very helpful with the cleanup. Now, when fixing the tape, make sure to leave at least 3 to 5 mil gap around all the edges and sockets and walls. This is approximately the thickness of the plaster that you'll be applying. That way, once you've finished, the tape should come off nice and easily and you won't be having to trim it or cut any of the tape off afterwards. The wall is now ready for the primer to be applied. I'm using a Bondit primer, pre-grit Bondit, which is my favourite at the minute. There's quite a few different types you can get. They all do the job. They're just some I find easier to work with than others. And the Bondit pre-grit I find is just the right consistency to get a decent coverage. Some of the other brands, Blue Grit for example is another one. That one I find a bit too thick and quite heavy, and then it leaves quite a thick, it's got an aggregate in it, I think it's sand, like a sand aggregate that's just a bit too harsh, a bit difficult to get over when you finish. So the pre-grit is the one I would recommend. Any hairline cracks that you see that are visible, make sure to go over with some fibre tape, or if you prefer you can use paper tape, it all works. And then away you go. See Chris there, my brother on the left, just poking his hand in. He started priming the wall. He's got the roller and is going to do the main area, and you mustn't forget to do your edges as well. That I'd recommend a little paintbrush, which I've got there. And away I go doing all the edges. So I'll go around doing the edges, around the sockets, the faffy areas, and Chris will cover the large area. This is quite porous, this, there actually used to be tiles on this wall, believe it or not. They've since been scraped off quite well actually, but we're now priming that wall and ready to put the plaster over. So I've done all the edges, they're all primed. Kris has almost finished the main section. There is just a couple of small areas that require some deep filling. So on this occasion we're going to use Thistle Bondit 60. It's an undercoat plaster that goes off incredibly rapidly, which is really handy for jobs like this that we want to get done in one day. You'll notice as well that the mixer I'm using is actually incredibly basic. It's a 18-volt drill. I'm using Milwaukee because I get on really well with them, and I've got a couple of them now, so you end up getting all the ones with the batteries. But my brother uses a DeWalt, they're fine too. And literally just a paddle. I've got a standard paddle for very small mixes. You can use a paint mixing paddle, that works quite effective. It's not as splashy as some of the other paddles, and when you're just mixing small amounts, it mixes them really well. And I actually find the 18-volt battery will mix a 25 kilogram bag of multi-finish plaster really well as well. Slightly, I'd use a different paddle for that, of course. Once you've mixed up your bonding, make sure to wash your tools, clean them off, because this stuff does go off very quickly. It'll probably be too hard to use after about 30 minutes, and then the idea is you can plaster it after 60 minutes. But realistically, once you've mixed this stuff up, you've got a good 15-20 minutes tops, I would say, to use the gear that you've mixed up. So don't mix up any more than you can use in about that time. Now, all the areas that I've bonded and deep filled, I like to put fibre tape over the top of them. These are you do have risks of cracking in these areas. I know not everyone does this, but I believe it is a better practice to fix tape. It can be a little bit faffy and a bit time consuming, which is why I think a lot of people skip that step, but I really do think it's worth doing. Okay, now the wall's prepped, the bonding's gone off, we've had a bite to eat, and we're back and ready to start the mixing. So this is probably about 30-40 minutes later. Everything's hard, the primer's nice and solid, and it's time to mix up the fast set finish. This is about, I think it's a little over 10 square meters, so I think one bag will probably do this wall. And that's a 25 kilogram bag of Thistle fast set multi-finish, and that will require about, it says 12 litres on the bag, but I found it's more like 13 or 14 litres to make it actually spreadable without actually breaking your wrist and shoulder. And the best way to do this is I'd always add the water in first, then I would add maybe 2/3 of the powder. If you're on your own, give it a whiz, then add a little bit more powder, mix it, and then if you've measured it correctly, you can add the remaining of the powder and then mix it. Make sure to give the edges of your bucket a good scrape with the bucket trowel so you don't get any dry clumps around the side. And then you can give it a wipe round with your paintbrush as well, just to keep the sides of the bucket nice and clean. Depending on what paddle you're using and what sort of mixer, it normally only takes 2-3 minutes to mix up a tub. 5 minutes probably if you've got a bit of a small mixing paddle. Basically, as soon as it looks lump-free and appears nice and creamy, think of it as like chocolate angel delight, and then you are about ready to go. This is actually a rather small mixing paddle that I'm using. I was probably a bit too lazy to get my slightly bigger one out of the van. It mixes just fine. There's nothing wrong with it in any way other than it'll take you a little bit longer to get the mix done, that's all. Okay, the mix is looking pretty good. So this is about the consistency. This is what we want it to look like. It's a lovely, creamy, thick mix. Obviously not too thick. It's sort of, it's a soft, buttery mix, I'd almost describe it as. Alright, now we're mixed. Make sure, as always, clean off your tools straight away. This stuff will go rock hard if you neglect it and leave it, and then that will just damage the tools. And then, of course, any hard bits that are left on your tools, when you then use it again to mix up on the next coat, they tend to break off and fall into the mix. So it is important to keep all plastering tools lovely and clean. This will help stop any cross-contamination at later mixes later on in the day. Always make sure to wet, that's my hawk there, we'll give it a wet with a paintbrush before starting. That will help prevent the plaster from sucking into the hawk too much when I put it on. However, it's worth noting, once you have wet it, the very first scoop of plaster you put on is going to splodge a bit, so you do need to be a bit mindful not to be too heavy-handed with the first scoop. Some people use spot boards. It's basically a table and they'll pour the plaster on the table, but this, for me at least, is a relatively small wall, so I'm quite comfortable just scooping it out of the tub using a rectangular bucket trowel. Now here we are, we start the wall. Always start at the top, work left to right if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, it's easier to work the other way. But yes, I always start at the top, go along the top. I normally come maybe 3-4 trowel whips down from the top, and then I will then come back underneath and come from the bottom up. You might notice here, with each trowel full of gear that I've got, I'm passing over the wall 3 times. So each one, and this is quite deliberate, So I will go over once, then go back one more time, and then finally go once over again, then move on. It's very easy to play with the plaster too much and go over it and over it, trying to get it flatter and flatter and flatter. It's much more efficient to just get it on the wall and then move on. You'll have time to flatten it later. Now the top third of the wall is done, I will then move back and I start at the bottom. This is just purely what works well for me. Some plasterers will just do a little bit at the top and then they will go straight from the bottom to the top all the way. I personally find this more comfortable and works very well for me. So the first coat is now been fully applied. So I will now clean off my hawk and trowel, make them all nice. I'll give the bucket a scrape round and clean the sides. Now, something worth noting, with thistle fast set finish, they advise you don't mix fresh gear. So you can add a little bit more water to wet up the gear a bit, because the fast set finish does start to stiffen quicker than standard. So you may find as you're getting towards the end of the wall, certainly after 10-15 minutes, it's starting to thicken. So I give my bucket a scrape on the inside. I'll just splash a little bit of water clean around the sides, and that little bit of water from the paintbrush is enough to just wet the mix up a little bit for me. And the remaining amount is, or should be, enough to get the second coat on. It's approximately, in my experience, about a third of the gear. You should have about a third remaining, and that will get the second coat done. Now, because we are using thistle fast set, there's no waiting times really. So straight away, that is my flexible speed skim. It's a plastic speed skim, 4-foot one, and that is a very quick way of flattening the wall. So I will whiz over that with the speed skim. I will go right to left, left to right, and then tops and bottoms as well. This is a really great tool for flattening sort of largish areas. They come in all sizes. I quite like the 4-foot one, it's quite versatile. I've also got a 6-foot one as well, which can be very useful for sort of even bigger walls. Now that that's been speed skimmed, I will very quickly give the mix another whiz round. It's only a quick one. Because the mix is only a third, there's not much in the bucket. You'll notice I've switched paddles and it's actually a paint mixing paddle. So with very small mixes, it's much less splashy. Really, really handy. Very useful tip. Adding a little bit of water just to wet it up a touch. Again, this isn't normally recommended for the standard multi-finish that we commonly use, but it is specified on the instructions specifically to do this method when using the fast set finish. And then once that's mixed, give the paddle a good clean, like always. And then once that's been cleaned, put to the side, we'll start on the second coat, repeating the process. It's exactly the same, only this time you'll find the gear slides over a little smoother, and you'll notice it'll go a bit further as you've already sort of packed out the wall and made it a lot flatter. almost finished this wall. It's worth noting as well, with fast set multi-finish, you have about 15 minutes to get the first coat on, as a rough guide. So I would say any area that you're comfortable doing for 15 minutes, or can do in 15 minutes. I've been plastering over 2 decades, so this wall, I think it's 12 square meters if I remember correctly, and it's quite comfortable for me. You can see I'm not even sweating, like it's quite easy. However, fast set finish really has been marketed for patches or smaller areas where you might benefit from using. You'll notice as well, I've not done underneath the socket yet. I leave those slightly more awkward areas till the end. My trowel doesn't quite fit in there, so I've got a margin trowel, a smaller trowel that fits in beautifully, and I will be using that once I finish the main section of the wall. It's quite normal, any awkward faffy bits that you can't get your full-size trowel into, I tend to leave till the end, and then I will go over them then. Now that's all finished, make sure again to clean all your tools. They don't call plastering a wet trade for nothing. Lots and lots of cleaning, keeping on top of the tools is very important, making sure they're always clean. If you find you have a little bit of gear left over as well, scrape that out. I've used rubble bags. Throw that away in a rubble bag. Make sure to give the plastering bucket a good clean as well. I quite like using a paintbrush. You can actually buy specific plasterers' paintbrushes, but they're basically the same as any 4-inch paintbrush. I would recommend you getting a cheaper one, as they do get a bit battered and abused, so buying a very high-end 4-inch paintbrush perhaps would be a little bit of waste of money. But I do find paintbrushes really effective, an effective cleaning tool for plasterers, for plastering tools. So once everything's clean, you want to go straight back over the wall. No brakes on this one, I'm afraid. The fast set will be starting to turn, so I will first give it a flatten with the speed skim, same method as before. Right, that's all done with now, so it's cleaned. I'll put the protection clip on the edge, and we will not be using that anymore. So I can put the speed skim away now. We're done with that. Now I just want my trowel and my trusty paintbrush. I like to go over my edges first. It tends to dry and you tend to get little clumps and lumps around your edges, so I quite like to give it a little slice with a trowel, wipe with a paintbrush and just tidy up those edges first. Now all the edges are flatter. They might not be perfect at this stage, don't worry too much about that. This is only the first flatten. I will then, I've switched to a small hand sprayer. I find it quite, for the larger areas, it's a little bit easier. I go left to right And then if you notice the plaster tearing at all, which it shouldn't really be doing at this stage if you're on top of it enough, but if you do catch a bit of tearing, that's when you want to just give it a light mist with the sprayer, and that will help wet it up a little bit and pull it in. As we are using fast set finish, it's pretty much non-stop at this point, so you will flatten the wall, and then basically as soon as you've finished flattening the wall, again you've got maybe 5-10 minutes at this stage. It shouldn't take much longer than that. You then want to go again. So if you were flattening in a small patch, for example, that only took you a minute, I would then leave it at least another 5 minutes before then going over it again, but you wouldn't need to leave it much longer. If you find your trowel is getting a bit dirty, or a bit of dry plaster's clumping up around the edges or on the back of the trowel, just give it a wipe. It is important to keep it clean, especially in the early days. If you're not really used to plastering, you'll find it a lot easier if you can just keep that trowel nice and clean. So as and when bits clump over and stick on the back, just give them a wash off with the paintbrush. Once you're a bit more experienced, you sort of learn to deal with it much better, but certainly in the earlier days it's much easier if you can just keep your trowel really clean. So you'll notice I'm having to use a little bit more water here, where the fast set finish is pulling in a bit quicker. It's certainly nothing of any concern or to worry about. Just make sure to apply a little bit of water just so that the trowel can run over smoothly, making sure not to take off too much excess plaster. You should really be flattening what's on there, you don't want to be removing any of the plaster that's actually on there. All you're really doing is flattening what's there. soon as you've finished that trowel, straight back on with the next one. This will be officially the first wet trowel. Again, you'll need to sort of feel the wall out. I found at this stage you will want some water. You see me brushing it on. That paintbrush will be dipped in water, just dipped in a bucket of water, and then just sort of painted on lightly. It's really not that much water still, just a little splash, and that really helps the trowel just glide over, really getting out those lines. This should get the majority of the lines out by the end of this trowel. This is a little bonus section I did for the customer. They sort of asked last minute if I could do the little bit, this little triangular section of wall, and I was able to, so I said yes. So I got this on. This wall, I don't know if you can see, it has tightened in a bit more than I'd like, so I've given it quite a thorough going over with the paintbrush. This is that really sort of wets it up and brings it back and allows you to get over it. But this particular section had dried a bit more than I'd have liked. Again, it's no problem as long as you know how to deal with it. And in this instance, giving it a good hard brush with the paintbrush really brings it back to life and allows you to get the trowel over it and get those lines out. You'll notice on this one as well, it is a triangular shape. My trowel is a rectangle, so those points at the ends, obviously the trowel doesn't fit. It's not a problem. There's pretty much any shape you can imagine you can get trowels for, and in this case it's a simple pointing trowel, sort of a little small trowel that has sort of a diamond shaped head, and that fits in there beautifully. But if you look, you can pretty much buy any shape and size trowel you can think of. You've just got to pre-plan if you're doing an unusual area. Just make sure you've taken that into account, that you've got a tool that will actually fit in the area. Right, at this stage, it's now ready for its second wet trowel. So what I'll do here, I'll pull off all the tape. The second wet trowel, I will only use I'll use slightly less water than the first. It should be, the walls should be very flat. There shouldn't be many lines left at all. This just allows you to get, so taking off the tape at this stage allows you to just make sure those edges and lines are as flat and correct as can be. On occasion, the tape, you know, you may have gone under the tape, or the tape may have pulled a tiny bit of the plaster off, and taking it off at this stage allows you to just repair any little bits around the edges. Also, all the plaster is on, and it's starting to firm up now, so there's much less mess produced at this stage. So you repeat the process. You'll notice I'm alternating between flattens, so between trowels. I'll alternate going left to right, sort of right left, right left, right left, one trowel, and then the next trowel I will go up and down, up and down, up and down. This does help get keep the wall nice and flat. It's not crucial. I know plenty of plasterers that don't bother with this method and their walls seem fine. Like it's just something I was taught, and it sort of stuck with me, and I like to do it. Same applies with the skirting line. Pop some tape over the skirting just to make tidying up a bit easier. Again, you don't have to masking tape or duct tape all your edges. Some people think it's a waste of time. They can just spend a bit more time, be cleaner, or they might just give them a clean and a wipe and a tidy afterwards. I don't always tape all my edges, if I'm being completely honest, but I certainly do more than I don't, especially in people's homes like this particular house. So now that that trowel is pretty much finished, it will still really benefit from a dry trowel. That will be its final trowel. This one is less time sensitive. The wall is pretty much done now. It looks good. The next trowel will just smooth it over a little bit, give you a chance to give it another check over. But you now have time, if you want to have a bit of a tidy up, clear things away. It quite often works better if you can leave a little bit of a gap between your wet trowel. I'm a big fan of these grime wipes. I get them from Toolstation. They're fantastic at dealing with silicone and all sorts of the PVAs and the pre-grits and things that we use. SBRs, they're fantastic at cleaning, and they're really big and durable wipes as well. So I get on really well with these. I find they're fantastic for cleaning up your skirtings, any bits of spillage. We do sheet down very thoroughly with the carpet protectors and floor protectors, so there isn't very often any spillages underneath, but on the rare occasions there is a drip or anything underneath, they're fantastic at clearing those up. So that's the wall done. It's now operation cleanup. Very important, possibly the most important part of the job, as quite often you can plaster a wall and have it looking absolutely flawless, and then if you leave the house looking a mess, they just remember you as a really messy plasterer. So very important to leave the place looking lovely and clean. And there you have it. That is a finished plastered wall in fast set finish, done in one day, literally three or 4 hours old, and it's looking at its sort of darkest as it's drying.